It started with a sound, not a scream, not a storm, just a faint hum beneath the trees, like the forest itself was breathing. A 13-year-old boy and his German shepherd were the first to find it. A metal hatch locked tight, hidden under years of moss and silence. But when the boy leaned closer, he didn't just hear the wind. He heard something alive. If you had found them first, what would you have done? Before we begin, support us by subscribing to the channel and ringing the bell so you'll never miss a story filled with love, hope, and the quiet miracles of life. The rain in Redwood Creek never fell softly. It whispered, hissed, and clung to everything. The sky hung low over the Oregon Valley, a pale slate pressing down on the world. Mist drifted through the redwoods like breath, and the air carried that damp, metallic scent of soil and pine needles. By late afternoon, the whole town had taken shelter under porches and old umbrellas, but one figure still moved along the muddy trail cutting into the woods. Eli Turner, 13, walked with his hood pulled tight. He wasn't big for his age, lean, wiry, restless, but there was something sharp in the way he looked at things, like he was always taking the world apart to see how it worked. His dark hair stuck out under the hood, wet at the ends, and his gray eyes kept flicking between the ground and the trees. A small camera hung around his neck, an old digital one with a cracked screen, his father's, from before the fire. Beside him trotted Scout, a German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and the steady confidence of a veteran soldier. 4 years old, trained once for search and rescue, he still moved like every scent might be a clue. His muscles rolled beneath wet fur, and his breath came out in even puffs of steam. One ear was notched from an old injury, and when he tilted his head, the scar caught the light, a reminder of a life before Eli. "Keep close," Eli murmured. Scout gave a soft grunt in reply. They followed the trail until the sounds of the town, distant cars, a barking dog, faded away. The deeper they went, the thicker the silence grew, filled only by rain dripping from high branches and the occasional call of a jay. For Eli, this forest was more than a refuge. It was a map of memories. His parents used to hike here every weekend before the wildfire took them both. He still remembered the day, the sirens, the orange sky, the phone call that ended in static. A gust of wind made the redwoods groan, and Scout stopped. His tail stiffened, ears twitching. He stared uphill, toward the darker part of the forest. Eli froze. "What is it, boy?" Scout's nose lifted. A low hum drifted through the rain, steady, mechanical, too regular to belong to nature. Eli followed the sound, his pulse quickening. They climbed a narrow rise slick with moss. At the top, the trees opened into a clearing no larger than a basketball court. In the center stood a concrete structure, rectangular, colorless, and wrong. It was too new, too clean for the forest around it. The walls were smooth, seamless, and completely blank. No windows, no door. Eli circled it slowly, mud squelching under his boots. The building was about 20 feet tall and twice as wide. Its surface glistened under the drizzle. Scout sniffed the corners, uneasy, his tail low. "There's no way in," Eli whispered. He ran his hand along the wall, cold, damp, and faintly vibrating. That hum was louder here, like something alive behind the concrete. Near the back corner, he found a slit, thin, vertical, about the width of his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. He looked around. A fallen redwood had crashed against two others, forming a rough angle like a ladder. Eli wiped his hands on his jeans and tested the trunk. Solid enough. "Stay, Scout." He climbed carefully, shoes slipping once on the slick bark. When he reached the height of the slit, the sound from inside grew clearer, steady, electric, mechanical. He pressed his face to the gap. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. Then, as his eyes adjusted, faint blue lights flickered inside. Rows of metal frames filled the space, stacked from floor to ceiling, humming softly. It looked like a server room, machines breathing in rhythm. "What the hell?" he muttered. He lifted his father's camera, pressed the lens against the slit, and took a few photos. The shutter click sounded too loud. Then, from deep inside, came a noise, a light scrape, like a shoe shifting against the floor. Eli's breath caught. He leaned closer, straining to see movement, but the light inside flickered and went still. The hum continued, steady as before. "Someone's in there," he whispered. Scout barked once from below, sharp, warning. The sound startled Eli. He lost his balance and grabbed the trunk. Bark tore under his hand. He He steadied himself, heart pounding, and scrambled down. Scout circled him once, whining low in his throat. "Okay, we're going." Eli slung his camera across his chest and took one last look at the building. The rain hit the roof in a steady hiss, and the forest swallowed the sound. Whatever it was, it didn't belong there. By the time they reached the trail again, twilight had started bleeding into the trees. The sky dimmed to charcoal, and the fog thickened along the creek. Scout pressed close to Eli's leg, silent now. When they finally stepped out of the woods, the lights of Redwood Creek flickered through the mist like distant fireflies. The smell of wet asphalt and chimney smoke met them as they crossed the last bridge home. Their small yellow house stood at the end of Alder Street, with ivy climbing the porch rail and a woodpile stacked under the eaves. Through the kitchen window, Eli saw his grandmother, Helen Turner, standing over the stove. She was short and square-shouldered, her silver hair pinned up in the same way every morning. The years had lined her face, but not dulled her eyes. They were clear, steady, the kind that saw straight through excuses. She turned when the door opened. "You're soaked, Elijah. Just rained harder up there." Helen's gaze dropped to his boots. "And you've been in the mud again. What did you find this time?" Eli hesitated, then set the camera on the table. "Something weird in the woods?" She sighed softly. "You always find weird." "No, Grandma, this one's real." He scrolled through the camera. 3 blurry shots glowed on the screen. Metal frames, faint lights, cables dangling like vines. "See? There's no door, no windows, just this." Helen leaned closer, squinting. For a moment, her face shifted. Recognition, maybe, or old worry. "That spot," she murmured, "up past Alderglen Trail? Yeah. I remember talk about a government lab out there years ago. They said it shut down before it ever opened." She looked up at him, expression sharpening. "You didn't go inside, did you?" Eli shook his head. "Couldn't? There's no way in." "Good. You'll leave it that way. Whatever's humming in those woods, it's not ours to mess with." He nodded, but his eyes said something else. Helen saw it and sighed. She poured him a mug of cocoa, the kind with too much sugar and a touch of cinnamon, and slid it across the table. Scout curled at Eli's feet, tail tapping once before going still. Outside, rain drummed softly on the roof. The town slept, and the forest hummed. Somewhere beyond the creek, in that blank concrete shell, blue lights pulsed in the dark. Eli stared into his mug, his reflection trembling in the chocolate surface. He couldn't stop thinking about the sound, the low, steady heartbeat of something hidden. He told himself he'd stay away, but he already knew he wouldn't. Morning came thin and gray, crawling over the hills of Redwood Creek like smoke that had forgotten how to burn. The rain had stopped, but everything still dripped, the eaves, the trees, even the air. Eli Turner woke before the alarm, the echo of that low mechanical hum still alive in his head. Scout was already sitting by the window, watching the fog lift off the fields behind the house, ears angled toward the forest. The dog hadn't barked once all night, but he hadn't really slept either. Eli pulled on jeans and an old flannel shirt that used to belong to his dad. The fabric hung loose on his narrow shoulders. When he came downstairs, the kitchen smelled like toast and coffee. His grandmother, Helen, stood by the counter in her robe, reading a folded newspaper she didn't seem to care about. Her glasses perched low on her nose, silver hair still damp from a quick shower. "You're up early," she said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep." "Still thinking about that building?" He hesitated. "It's just strange, Grandma. Who builds something like that with no door?" Helen folded the paper carefully and set it aside. "People with something to hide, Elijah. That's who." She turned toward him, her tone softening. "I know how your mind works, but some questions don't need answers. Curiosity is a good thing until it walks you into trouble." Eli nodded, though his mind was already back in the forest. He didn't want to argue with her, not when she was the only family he had left. But the thought of that humming concrete shell gnawed at him like a loose tooth. After breakfast, he stuffed a flashlight, his camera, and a notebook into his backpack. He added a peanut butter sandwich, mostly for show, and clipped Scout's leash to his collar. "Just for a walk," he called, and Helen didn't look up from the sink. By the time they reached the trail, the fog was thinning into strands that clung to the lower branches. Birds were back in the canopy, their songs darting between the trees like quick flashes of sound. The forest smelled alive again, wet bark, cold earth, and the faint sweetness of fern. Scout trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to sniff the air. When they reached the rise where the clearing began, Eli's pulse picked up. The structure stood exactly as they had left it, mute and colorless, its walls beaded with moisture. The hum was still there, steady and indifferent. He approached cautiously. The fallen redwood he'd used yesterday looked slicker now, so he searched for another vantage point. That's when he saw the thin trail of disturbed leaves near the far side of the structure, fresh, faintly indented boot prints leading away into the woods. "Someone's been here," he whispered. Scout sniffed the ground, tail low but wagging once, uncertain. The prints weren't large, probably a man's, the tread deep enough to be recent. They disappeared into the underbrush after about 30 yards, swallowed by mud and roots. Eli crouched, took a quick photo for reference, and followed them a short distance before deciding not to push his luck. Back at the structure, he noticed something new, a faint smell of ozone, sharp like burnt wiring. His flashlight beam swept across the surface until it caught on the slit again. He steadied himself and peered through. The inside was darker now, but still pulsing faintly blue. Machines still alive, still breathing. Then he heard it, faint but clear, a whisper, not words exactly, more like the low rise and fall of human speech, muffled by walls and distance. Scout gave a short growl, and the sound stopped. Eli swallowed. "Hello?" he called, barely above a whisper. Nothing. The hum returned, unbroken. Then, from somewhere behind him, a voice. "Kid, what are you doing up there?" Eli startled, nearly dropping his flashlight. He turned to see Officer Marlene Ross standing 10 yards away, her uniform dark with moisture and a thermos in one gloved hand. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and a dark auburn braid pulled tight against her neck. Her face was the kind that rarely smiled, but carried a calm authority that made people tell her the truth without knowing why. Marlene had grown up in Redwood Creek, daughter of a logger who'd lost his job when the mills shut down. She'd worked her way up from night patrols to sheriff after her predecessor retired early with a bad back and worse habits. Years of dealing with small-town trouble, drunks, missing hikers, runaway teens, had left her pragmatic and a little weary, but she remembered Eli's family. She'd been one of the responders the night the Turner's cabin burned. That kind of memory never faded. I was just taking pictures," Eli stammered, climbing down. Scout wagged his tail nervously, hovering close. Marlene frowned, looking past him at the structure. "That's the old research bunker. Been closed off since before you were born." "It's humming," Eli said. "There's power in there. Machines. I saw them." She raised an eyebrow. "Machines?" He handed her the camera. The images were blurry, but clear enough to show racks and faint lights. Marlene studied them quietly. "I'll have to report this," she said finally. "Could be trespassers. Or worse, kids setting up something stupid." Her tone softened when she looked back at him. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Eli. You hear something, you call us. Got it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She knelt, scratching Scout behind the ears. "And you keep him close. He's got more sense than half the men I know." Scout leaned into her hand, tail thumping once. Eli wanted to tell her about the footprints, the whispers, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way her jaw tightened when she looked at the building, like she'd seen enough mysteries for one lifetime. She took a few photos of her own with a department-issued phone and jotted notes in a small waterproof pad. When she left, heading back toward her patrol car on the logging road, the woods felt quieter, heavier. Eli stood there, watching until her shape disappeared behind the trees. Scout gave a low whine, and Eli nodded. "Yeah, I know. She doesn't believe me." He turned back to the structure one last time. The hum seemed louder again, almost rhythmic, like it was aware of him standing there. He felt something shift in his gut. Not fear exactly, but a pull, as if the forest itself wanted him to come closer. They left just before the sky broke open again. The rain came down in silver sheets, washing the prints from the earth. By the time Eli reached home, the afternoon had dimmed to a blue-gray haze. Helen met him at the door, arms folded. "You've been gone long enough for me to call the sheriff." "She already found me," he said, pulling off his wet jacket. Officer Ross was there. She said the place was a research bunker. Helen's eyebrows drew together. She would know. She didn't sound sure, Eli said. "And Grandma, there were footprints." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Footprints? Fresh ones. Someone else was there." She didn't answer right away, just moved to close the curtains. "You'll stay away from that place, Eli. Let the police handle it." He wanted to argue, but stopped when he saw the tremor in her hand as she reached for the curtain cord. She wasn't scared for herself. She was scared for him. That night, as rain ticked against his window, Eli lay awake listening. The forest beyond the creek was a black wall, but in the rhythm of the rain, he thought he could still hear it, the faint, steady hum, traveling on the wind like a voice too far to understand but too close to ignore. Scout lifted his head from the rug, ears twitching. They both knew it wasn't over. The next morning broke pale and brittle, the kind of cold that scraped your breath into fog. Redwood Creek woke slow, its single main street still slick from the night rain. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly over the quiet town square, and the smell of wet asphalt mixed with the distant tang of wood smoke. Eli Turner walked with Scout trotting close, leash slack, boots leaving narrow prints on the soaked sidewalk. He had one goal that morning, to make someone believe him. The Redwood Creek Sheriff's Office sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, an old brick building whose faded green door creaked every time it opened. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee, damp paper, and the cedar polish that someone had overused. Behind the front desk sat Deputy Ron Keller, a broad man in his early 50s with a head of thinning blonde hair and a bristle of gray beard that framed a mouth used to saying no. His uniform strained at the shoulders, and his eyes had the weary patience of someone who had seen every kind of small-town trouble twice already. He'd worked the county for 25 years, and it showed, in the stoop of his back, the coffee stains on his paperwork, and the resigned humor he used as armor. Eli stood just inside the doorway, shifting his weight. Scout sat obediently beside him, tail sweeping the floor once, waiting for permission to move. Keller looked up from his computer, squinted, and frowned. "You're Helen Turner's boy, right? What brings you in this early?" "I need to talk to Officer Ross," Eli said, voice steadier than he felt. "It's about the thing in the woods." Keller raised an eyebrow. "You mean that old concrete bunker? She mentioned it yesterday." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossing over his stomach. "I hear you stirred up quite the story." "It's not a story," Eli replied quickly. "Something's going on out there. There were machines, and I heard—" He stopped when Keller's smirk deepened. "You heard what?" "Voices," Eli said quietly, "and footprints, fresh ones." The deputy gave a slow, deliberate sigh. "Kid, that site's been sealed for 20 years. If there's noise, it's probably old wiring or a generator someone forgot to shut down. As for footprints, this is Oregon. Hunters, hikers, kids playing stupid. I'm not making it up," Eli said. "Officer Ross saw it too." Keller shrugged. "Then she'll handle it." He picked up his mug and turned back to the computer. "Now, how about you and your dog let the grown-ups get back to work?" Scout gave a low growl, barely audible, but enough to make Keller glance down. "That mutt better not pee on the floor," he muttered. Eli clenched his fists but said nothing. He turned to leave just as the office door opened, and Officer Marlene Ross stepped inside, damp from the morning mist, her jacket unzipped and radio clipped at her shoulder. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much. "Marlene," Keller said with a chuckle, "your young friend's back. Says the haunted bunker's talking to him again." Ross gave him a look sharp enough to shave with, then turned to Eli. "Let's step outside." They walked to the parking lot behind the station. The sky hung low, flat and gray. Marlene leaned against her patrol SUV, arms crossed, studying the boy. "You shouldn't have come here alone," she said. "Your grandmother will worry." "She doesn't believe me either," Eli said. "No one does." Marlene's tone softened. "I believe you saw something, but I went out there again last night, called in one of our tech guys to check the readings. Nothing. No power signatures, no heat. The whole place is cold." Eli frowned. "That's not possible. It was humming yesterday." "Maybe it's off now. Maybe someone's messing around out there." She looked toward the trees beyond the town. "We've had a few break-ins at old forest facilities lately. Teenagers looking for copper wire or trouble." "It wasn't kids," Eli insisted. "The machines were new, clean, and I heard someone whispering." Marlene rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Look, I'll file it officially. That's all I can do until we have proof." Eli nodded, but didn't speak. His disappointment settled heavy in his chest. Ross crouched to scratch Scout's neck. "You're a smart one, huh? Keep this kid out of trouble." The dog leaned into her hand, eyes half closed. "He's a good dog," she said. "The best," Eli murmured. Ross stood, checked her watch. "Go home, Eli. Stay clear of that site. If you see anyone near it again, call me directly." She handed him a card, her number scribbled on the back in ink that had smudged slightly from rain. When she drove off, Eli stood watching her taillights fade. The card felt heavy in his pocket. He didn't know if he wanted to call her again or prove her wrong. That afternoon, the sky brightened for the first time in days. Sunlight broke through the clouds, making the wet streets shimmer. Eli walked Scout to the small-town library, a two-story building that smelled of dust and pine cleaner. Inside, the librarian, Mrs. Colette Harris, nodded in greeting. She was a short woman in her 60s, with white curls and half-moon glasses, always wearing wool cardigans in loud colors. Her kindness was matter-of-fact, the kind that didn't ask questions. "Research project?" she asked, eyeing his backpack. "Something like that," Eli said. He spent hours combing through the archives, old newspaper microfilm and yellowed county records. Most of it was dull: property sales, Forest Service maps, community fairs. Then, finally, he found it. A small article from '98. Redwood Research Siam Oji halted over safety concerns. The article mentioned a Project Greenvale, led by a private contractor working with the Department of Agriculture. No details on purpose, only that construction was halted after a chemical spill and public protests about environmental risks. Eli copied the article into his notebook, hands shaking a little. Project Greenvale. The name sounded like something buried for a reason. On the walk home, he replayed the words over and over. If the site had been abandoned more than 20 years ago, how could it still have power? Who would run machines out there? The whispers came back to him, the faint rhythm that had sounded almost like breathing. When he reached Alder Street, the smell of chicken soup drifted from the house. Helen was on the porch, trimming the dead leaves off her potted herbs. She looked up as he approached. "Long day, huh?" "Library," he said. "Found something?" "About your mystery bunker?" Eli nodded and handed her the notebook. She adjusted her glasses and read the copied headline. "Project Greenvale," she said softly, the name catching something old in her memory. "You've heard of it?" "Only in rumors," she admitted. "People used to say it was some kind of environmental experiment, trying to grow trees faster after the old logging fires. Others said it was a cover for something else." "What kind of something else?" She gave a thin smile. "Every small town has ghosts, Eli. Sometimes they're just paperwork that never got buried right." He wanted to ask more, but she closed the notebook gently. "Enough for today. You look tired." That night, Eli couldn't stop thinking about it. The machines, the voices, Project Greenvale. The name pulsed in his head like the hum itself. Scout lay beside his bed, snoring softly, paws twitching in some dream chase. Outside, the forest was silent, too silent. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs had gone missing. Eli sat up, listening. Then, faint and far off, through the cracked window, he heard it again. The same steady vibration he'd thought was just memory. But now, mixed into it, something else. A low voice, rhythmic, distant, like someone reciting numbers. Scout's ears shot up, and a soft growl rumbled in his chest. Eli stared into the dark. "It's still on," he whispered, and in his chest, curiosity burned hotter than fear. The next evening brought a strange calm to Redwood Creek. The rain had finally given way to a fragile clarity, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind had died down, and even the creek, usually noisy against its banks, whispered instead of rushed. By the time the sun folded itself behind the ridge, the sky had turned a pale, bruised purple. Eli Turner sat at his desk, the room dim except for the faint glow of his laptop screen. On the monitor were the blurry photos from the day before, metal frames, cold light, cables. He zoomed in again and again, trying to catch details that weren't there. Scout lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, one ear flicking each time Eli sighed. Helen had gone to bed early, worn out from the day. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Eli checked the time, 9:47 p.m. He looked at Scout, who lifted his head as if reading the boy's thoughts. "I know," Eli whispered. "We shouldn't, but it's not going away, is it?" Scout gave a low rumble, half growl, half sigh, the sound of resignation from a creature who'd seen enough bad ideas to recognize another one. Eli grabbed his backpack and flashlight, slipping his jacket on over his hoodie. He packed the essentials: camera, notebook, water bottle, and a strip of jerky that Scout accepted as payment for his silence. Outside, the air bit colder than he expected. The moon was a thin, curved blade hiding behind clouds. He moved quietly along Alder Street, Scout trotting beside him, nails clicking lightly against the damp pavement. The town slept without protest. When they reached the trailhead, Eli flicked his flashlight on low beam. The forest welcomed them like a door closing behind. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of soil, the sigh of branches. Scout's tail brushed his leg, a steady metronome of comfort. They followed the trail in silence until they reached the clearing. The structure waited there, identical yet changed in the dark. Its walls reflected the moonlight faintly, and a mist hung around its base like it was breathing. The hum was back, low but steady, vibrating faintly through the ground. Eli crouched near the fallen redwood and listened. This time, he could make out more than just the mechanical rhythm. Faint voices, indistinct but patterned, like speech caught behind thick glass. He whispered, "You hear that?" Scout's ears pricked forward. He circled the building again, flashlight beam slicing through fog. Then something new caught his eye, a faint shimmer along the south wall, as if moisture was running against gravity. He touched the surface and the hair on his arm rose. Static tingled through his fingertips. Suddenly, Scout stiffened, growling deep in his chest. His gaze locked on the tree line to the east. Eli swung the flashlight around, the beam catching movement, just a flicker, a shadow crossing between trunks. "Hello?" he called, voice small against the forest. A pause, then another flicker, closer. Whoever, or whatever, it was moved quietly, deliberately. Scout barked once, sharp and commanding, his tail up now, muscles tense. The forest answered only with the whisper of leaves. Eli's heart hammered. He backed toward the fallen log, eyes searching the dark. A man stepped into the clearing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette cutting a sharp outline against the mist. His jacket was military style, faded green with mud stains at the hem. A week-old beard shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, cold, focused, reflected the beam like animal glass. He looked around 40, though hard living might have taken years from him. His hands, bare despite the cold, were rough and scarred. "Easy, kid," the man said, voice low and even. "You shouldn't be out here." Eli swallowed, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter. Turn around. Go home." The man stepped closer. Scout barked again, baring his teeth. The man's tone sharpened. "Call him off." Eli hesitated. "He doesn't like strangers sneaking up on us." The man gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Smart dog. Keep him that way. Now leave." Eli squared his shoulders. "What is this place? Why is it running again?" The man's expression flickered, just for a second, like the question struck something buried. "You don't know what you're asking. I know it's not abandoned." "Kid," the man said quietly, glancing toward the trees as if listening for something. "If you're smart, you'll forget you ever found this place. People who dig too deep out here—" He didn't finish. Before Eli could ask again, a sound cut through the woods. A helicopter, faint but approaching fast. The man's head snapped up. "They're early," he muttered. Then, without another word, he turned and ran into the trees, vanishing between shadows. Eli stood frozen, flashlight beam trembling in his hand. Scout barked twice, uncertain, then looked up as a searchlight swept over the treetops. The helicopter passed quickly overhead, its lights scanning the forest like white lightning before veering southwest. Eli exhaled slowly. Whoever that man was, he wasn't supposed to be there either. He turned back toward the building. The hum was stronger now, a deep throb that felt alive beneath his feet. The slit on the upper wall glowed faintly. No longer cold blue, but warm amber, pulsing like a heartbeat. He raised the camera, took a photo, and checked the screen. The image came out distorted, light warped into streaks of red and gold, shapes twisting like static. Scout whimpered softly. Eli backed away. "Okay, we're done. Let's go." The hike back felt longer than ever. Every shadow seemed to move, every branch a whisper. Scout stayed glued to his side, muscles coiled. By the time they reached town, the moon had vanished behind. Clouds again. At home, the lights in Helen's window were still off. Eli slipped quietly through the back door, wiping mud off his boots before climbing the stairs. Scout followed without a sound. In his room, Eli shut the door and sat on the edge of his bed, shaking slightly. He looked at the new photo again, the strange glow, the distortion, and felt both wonder and fear tighten in his chest. Who was that man? What did "there early" mean? And why did it sound like he was part of whatever was happening there? Scout nudged his leg, eyes steady and alert. Eli reached down, scratching behind his ear. "We'll figure it out," he murmured. "But next time, we're not alone." The dog tilted his head, tail giving a slow wag. Outside, somewhere deep in the forest, a light blinked once, then went out. Morning came thin and quiet, sunlight fractured by mist. Eli hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man in the green jacket, the cold gleam of his eyes, the way he'd vanished into the forest when the helicopter passed. The image of that faint amber light pulsing behind the concrete wall haunted him like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. Scout lay at the foot of the bed, ears twitching at every creak of the old house, alert even in half sleep. By the time the first ray of sun reached the curtains, Eli was already dressed. He moved carefully down the stairs, boots in hand to avoid waking Helen. She'd worry herself sick if she knew he was going back. He scribbled a note, "At library, back by lunch," and left it on the kitchen table beside her coffee mug. Scout trotted after him, head high, tail low. The walk into the woods felt heavier this time. The air was colder, sharper. Dew clung to the grass, and fog lay thick over the creek like smoke that refused to rise. Eli followed the same trail but kept stopping, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The man's words echoed in his head. "You don't know what you're asking." When they reached the clearing, the building stood silent. No hum, no glow. The mist wrapped it completely, softening its edges until it looked almost like a natural formation, something carved by time. But Eli knew better. He crouched near the base and ran his fingers along the concrete, tracing the faint seams. Scout sniffed the ground and suddenly barked once, sharp, insistent. "What is it?" Eli whispered. The dog pawed at a patch of soil near the southwest corner. The earth there looked disturbed, darker, as if recently dug. Eli knelt, brushed the dirt away, and found metal beneath, a circular plate half buried under moss. A latch. His pulse spiked. He cleared the rest of the cover, revealing a trapdoor large enough for a person. No handle, just a recessed groove. He tried to lift it, but it didn't budge. He looked around, grabbed a fallen branch, and wedged it under the groove. With a grunt, he leveraged his weight until the seal broke with a faint metallic sigh. A rush of cold air exhaled from the darkness below. Scout backed away, whining low in his throat. "Yeah, I'm not thrilled either," Eli said, trying to sound braver than he felt. He switched on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dust. A ladder descended into the black. The rungs were metal, slick with condensation. Eli tied Scout's leash to a nearby root. "Stay here, I'll be quick." Scout growled softly, as if protesting, then sat, reluctantly obedient. Eli climbed down. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the metallic scent of machines and the faint, sterile tang of ozone. When his boots touched solid ground, he realized he was standing in a narrow corridor. The walls were smooth concrete, the floor coated in a thin layer of dust except for a single set of footprints, fresh, leading deeper inside. He followed them cautiously. The passage curved left, then opened into a wide chamber. His breath caught. Rows of equipment lined the walls, large generators, humming faintly, cables snaking up toward the ceiling. In the center stood a workstation, cluttered with monitors and sealed metal crates. Papers lay scattered across a table, and one of the screens still glowed weakly. He stepped closer. The monitor displayed lines of data, a map overlay of the Redwood Creek forest with sections marked in red. Beneath the map, a label read, "Project Greenvale, Phase 2 activation pending." Eli's mind spun. Phase 2? Was this still active? A faint sound made him freeze. A shuffle, then a metallic clink from behind one of the generator rows. He swung his flashlight around. "Hello?" His voice trembled. Someone stepped out from behind the machines. Not the man from last night, but someone else. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and a trimmed beard. His lab coat was wrinkled and streaked with grime, the collar open to reveal a plaid shirt beneath. His hands were steady but worn, the hands of a man who built things himself. His face was lined, not just from age but from burden. His eyes were sharp blue, alert yet tired. "Who are you?" Eli asked. The man raised his palms, not in fear but caution. "I could ask you the same, young man, but since you're trespassing in my lab, I think I get first rights to the question." His voice was low, precise, the kind that carried command without trying. This place, it's supposed to be abandoned, Eli stammered. It's in the middle of nowhere. The man sighed, almost amused. Abandoned? No. Hidden, yes. You have good eyes. Not many find it. Eli stepped closer, curiosity stronger than fear now. You're the one who built this? I'm the one who stayed behind, the man said. Name's Dr. Conrad Vale. Eli blinked. You're part of Project Greenvale? Dr. Vale gave a wry smile. Part of it? I am what's left of it. He turned to the monitors, fingers tapping keys with old familiarity. You shouldn't have come here. The forest isn't safe at night, and neither is this place. What is this project? Eli asked. Why is it still running? Dr. Vale hesitated. It wasn't meant to be secret. It began as a restoration program. We were developing bioreactive growth systems, machines that could accelerate forest regrowth after wildfires. We wanted to heal what people destroyed. His eyes darkened. But healing the earth is never simple. It attracts the wrong kind of attention. Government? Eli guessed. Worse. Vale said quietly. Money. Eli frowned, remembering the man in the jacket. There was someone here last night. A man. He said they were early. Vale stiffened. He found me again then. He turned off the monitors abruptly. That man isn't with me anymore. He used to be, before the project fell apart. Now he's working for people who want this tech for themselves. What do they want with it? Vale looked toward the ceiling, where the faint hum returned. Control. The system below this forest can alter how plants grow. Speed, density, resistance to fire. In the right hands, it could restore ecosystems. In the wrong hands, it could erase them. Eli swallowed. So, it's still running? Barely. I've been maintaining it alone. But last night's power surge, that was them trying to restart it remotely. Why not shut it down? Vale met his eyes. Because if I do, everything this forest's roots are tied to collapses. You think Redwood Creek survived the fires by luck? No. My system kept the soil alive. The balance is fragile. Eli's mind swirled. You're saying you're keeping the forest alive from under it? Vale nodded once. But I can't hold it forever. And now that they know it's still active, they'll come back. Before Eli could ask another question, Scout barked loudly from above, the sound echoing through the shaft. Vale's expression hardened. They're here. Who? The ones you saw. Go, now. He pushed Eli toward the ladder. Take your dog and get home. If they find you here, they won't ask questions. Eli hesitated. But no arguments. I'll buy you time. Vale handed him a flash drive, small and silver. If I don't make it out, show this to Officer Ross. Tell her Vale sent it. Will you be okay? Vale smiled faintly. I've been living with ghosts for years, boy. Go. Eli climbed fast, heart pounding. As he emerged into daylight, Scout barked again, tense, watching the trees. Eli looked back at the open hatch. Vale was gone. From below came the low, rising hum of machines powering up again, and the faint echo of voices. Angry, rushing. He yanked the hatch closed, threw branches over it, and ran until the forest swallowed every sound. Eli didn't stop running until the sound of his own footsteps drowned out the memory of the humming machines. His chest burned, lungs straining against the cold morning air. Scout kept pace beside him, tongue lolling, coat streaked with dirt from the sprint. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Eli bent over, gasping. His fingers still clutched the small, silver flash drive Dr. Vale had pressed into his hand. The sun had climbed above the treetops, bathing Redwood Creek in a weak gold. From this distance, the town looked peaceful, smoke curling from chimneys, children's bicycles scattered on porches. It was hard to believe that beneath those same hills, something vast and secret was stirring. Eli glanced at the flash drive, wondering if it could really hold proof of everything Vale had said. Scout nudged his hand, panting. I know, boy, Eli whispered. We have to tell someone. By the time they reached home, Helen was on the porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp as cut glass. She looked tired but furious, the kind of anger that comes from fear. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her flannel robe flapped slightly in the wind. Eli Turner, she said, voice low but trembling, you tell me right now where you've been. Eli froze. Scout, sensing tension, sat down, tail still. I went back, Eli admitted. Her expression hardened. You did what? There's more going on, Grandma. That place isn't abandoned. There's a lab underground, and I met a man, Dr. Conrad Vale. He's part of Project Greenvale. He said, Helen raised her hand sharply. Stop. You're talking nonsense. I'm not. Eli fumbled for the flash drive and held it out. He gave me this. He said to show it to Officer Ross. Helen's breath caught. She looked at the small silver object, then at her grandson's face. Eli, she said softly, what have you gotten yourself into? Before he could answer, Scout barked, short, urgent. Helen turned toward the road just as a black SUV slowed in front of their house. The windows were tinted, the license plates clean of a mud despite the rural roads. The engine idled for several seconds before the vehicle eased forward and disappeared around the corner. Helen's hand gripped the porch rail. Go inside, she said firmly. Lock the doors. Who was that? Eli asked. Not someone I want to find out about right now. She guided him inside, locking the door behind them. If what you're saying is true, we can't trust just anyone. Officer Ross first, no one else. They sat at the kitchen table. The morning light fell in slanted beams across the worn wood. Helen's hand trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee. I remember the Greenvale rumors, she said. When I worked at the clinic, there were whispers. Funding from private investors, biological research licenses that didn't match environmental studies. Then, after the fire in '98, everything went quiet. Dr. Vale said the system kept the forest alive, Eli said, but someone's trying to take it over. He said they'll come back. Helen looked out the window, expression unreadable. Then we'd better move before they do. A few hours later, Officer Marlene Ross stood at their kitchen counter, turning the flash drive over in her gloved hand. She had arrived fast, her cruiser parked discreetly behind the garage. Her auburn hair was tied back under her cap, and her jacket still smelled faintly of rain. Her eyes, usually calm, now carried a flicker of tension. You're sure this came from Vale himself? She asked. Eli nodded. He gave it to me. He said if anything happened, I should bring it to you. Ross slid the drive into her department laptop. The screen came alive, a folder titled Greenville Core Files. Inside were maps, encrypted data, and a series of video logs. The first file opened automatically. The footage showed Dr. Vale years younger, standing in the same underground chamber Eli had seen. His hair was darker, his face sharper, voice steady. Project Greenvale aims to synthesize a biological AI network capable of regulating plant growth patterns at the ecosystem level, he said on camera. The system uses environmental sensors linked to a self-learning program, Gaia Core, to maintain forest equilibrium. The recording flickered, showing corporate logos Eli didn't recognize. Then Vale's voice grew harder. Warning: unauthorized access could cause an uncontrolled cascade, mass overgrowth, or total collapse. Ross leaned back, eyes narrowing. This is more than an environmental project. It's bioengineering on a massive scale. Helen crossed her arms. And now it's sitting right under this town. Ross nodded slowly. That man who found you, Eli, the one in the jacket, did he give a name? No, but he said, they're early. Dr. Vale said he used to work with him. Ross frowned. Then he's probably ex-security or contractor. I've heard whispers about private firms buying up abandoned research patents. If they know this system's still active, they'll want control. What do we do now? Eli asked. Ross closed the laptop. We play this smart. I'll have the data verified off-site, but we can't let this leak yet. If Vale's right, shutting down the system wrong could trigger something worse. Helen looked uneasy. You mean the forest could die? Or grow out of control, Ross replied. Either way, this doesn't stay quiet much longer. Just then, Scout lifted his head and growled. All three turned toward the window. Another car, not the SUV this time, but a gray pickup, slowed near the gate. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low. Ross moved to the window, hand resting on her holster. The truck lingered, then rolled away without stopping. They're watching, Ross said grimly. We'll need to relocate Vale if he's still down there. He told me he'd buy me time, Eli said quietly. I don't know if he made it out. Ross's jaw tightened. Then we find out. Before she left, she handed Helen a card. Keep your doors locked. If you see anyone who doesn't belong, call me directly. Don't use the main station line. When the cruiser pulled away, Helen locked the door again and sank into a chair. Eli, she said softly, this is bigger than us. I know, he whispered, but we can't just stop. If they get to Vale, it's over. That night, the wind picked up again, sweeping through the trees like the forest itself was restless. Eli lay awake, listening to the branches scrape the roof. Scout paced by the window, uneasy, watching the dark yard beyond the porch light. Sometime past midnight, the power flickered. The house went dark. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind. Then, from far off, somewhere deep in the woods, came the low, rhythmic hum again. Louder this time, steadier, almost like it was alive. Eli sat up, heart racing. Scout growled, the fur along his back rising. Outside, faint orange light flickered between the trees. Not firelight, but something colder, mechanical. He turned toward the window. "Grandma," he whispered, "it's starting again." By sunrise, Redwood Creek was blanketed in an unnatural stillness. The birds didn't sing, and the air hung heavy, charged with a faint hum that seemed to come from deep underground. Eli hadn't slept at all. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flash drive, while Scout paced the room in tight, restless circles. The memory of the orange glow in the forest still burned behind his eyes. Helen entered quietly, her robe pulled tight around her. She looked older that morning, her face drawn and pale. "You didn't close your eyes all night," she said. Eli didn't answer. "It's stronger now. I can feel it." Helen exhaled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Officer Ross will handle it. That's her job. She can't stop it if she doesn't know what it's doing," Eli replied, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, fog pressed against the glass, making the world beyond look like a blank page waiting for trouble to be written on it. A car engine broke the silence. Helen peered through the curtain, her breath catching. "It's her." Officer Marlene Ross stepped out of her cruiser, her face tight with fatigue. Her auburn hair was still damp from the morning mist, and the faint dark circles under her eyes said she'd been up as long as Eli had. She carried a black duffel bag in one hand and a folder in the other. Inside, she set both items on the table. "I got your message," she said to Helen. "Power outages hit half the county last night. Whatever's happening under those hills, it's spreading." Eli leaned forward. "Did you check the flash drive?" Ross nodded. "I did, and I sent copies to a secure contact I trust in Salem, a tech analyst. He decrypted part of the data, most of its code, but one file stood out. Failsafe protocol." She slid a printed page toward him. "According to Vale's notes, the system can be neutralized, but only from inside the core chamber. There's a sequence that needs to be entered manually, or the AI reroutes and amplifies itself." Helen frowned. "That sounds like suicide." Ross's jaw tightened. "It could be, but if the network keeps expanding, it could destabilize the soil and flood the valley. Vale built something that connects to the entire root system, the forest, the river, maybe even beyond that." Eli's stomach nodded. "We have to find him." Ross nodded. "That's the plan." She unzipped the duffel and revealed 2 compact radios, headlamps, and a folded map marked with red lines. "If Vale's alive, he'll be near the access tunnels. We'll go in, get him out, and shut this thing down." Helen crossed her arms. "You're taking a child into that?" Ross met her eyes. "I'd rather he stayed here, but Vale trusted him. And if anything happens, I'll get him out myself." Helen hesitated, then looked at Eli. "If you go, you do what she says. No heroics." "I promise," Eli said, though both women could see the lie, sitting behind his determination. By mid-morning, they were deep in the forest again. The air grew colder as they neared the clearing, the hum vibrating faintly underfoot. Scout trotted ahead, nose low, alert. The building loomed through the fog like a wound in the earth. Ross surveyed the area, crouching near the base. "You said there's a hatch around here?" Eli pointed. "There." The branches he had used to cover it were gone. The hatch was wide open. Ross drew her flashlight, motioning for quiet. The air spilling from the opening was icy and smelled faintly of ozone. "Someone's already down there," she said. They descended carefully. The ladder groaned under their weight, echoing down the tunnel. When they reached the bottom, Ross signaled for Eli to stay close. The corridor was darker than before, the hum louder. Scout's claws clicked against the concrete as they moved forward. Halfway down the hall, they found signs of struggle. A broken tablet, scattered papers, and what looked like a bloodstain drying along the floor. Ross crouched beside it, her expression hardening. "He fought them." Eli swallowed. "Is he?" She shook her head. "Not sure, but this trail's fresh." They followed it into the main chamber. The generators still hummed, but the lights flickered red. On the central screen, lines of text scrolled rapidly, strings of code looping endlessly. A voice, faint but synthetic, pulsed through the speakers. "Gaia Core, activation phase complete." Ross cursed under her breath. We're too late. A clatter made them spin around. From behind a stack of crates, the man in the green jacket emerged, the one Eli had seen that night. His face was clearer now, weathered skin, sharp jawline, short dark beard streaked with gray. His left sleeve was torn, exposing a long scar running down his forearm. His eyes were cold and watchful, but there was something haunted behind them. He raised his hand slightly. "Easy, I'm not your enemy." Ross stepped forward, gun drawn. "Name, now." "Call me Ryan," he said. "I used to work for Vale, security and logistics. When the project shut down, I stayed on with the buyers who wanted to keep it alive. Mistake of my life." Eli stared. "You're the one who warned me." Ryan nodded once. "Didn't think anyone would believe a kid wandering the woods at night." Ross didn't lower her gun. "Where's Vale?" Ryan exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Taken. 2 men grabbed him last night when the system powered up. They're trying to force him to complete the transfer protocol, move control of Gaia Core to their servers. If they succeed, they'll own every route and field this network touches." "Where did they take him?" Ross demanded. "Lower chamber, behind the generator banks. There's a subtunnel only Vale knew how to lock, but they've cut through." Ross gestured toward the hall. "Show us." Ryan hesitated, glancing at Eli. "You brought the boy?" "He's not leaving," Ross said flatly. "Then we'd better move fast." They passed deeper into the compound. The hum grew oppressive, like the walls themselves vibrated with life. Faint lights blinked overhead, following them like eyes. When they reached the subtunnel, a metal door stood ajar, the lock sheared clean off. Inside, they found Vale, bound to a chair, bruised but conscious. He looked up as they entered, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. Ross knelt to cut his restraints. "We don't have much time. How do we stop this?" Vale winced, rubbing his wrists. "The fail-safe code. It's in the main terminal, but you'll need 2 authentication keys, mine and Ryan's." Ryan stiffened. "You gave me clearance years ago. It still works?" "Yes," Vale said. "But if we trigger it too late, the system will fight back." Eli stepped forward. "Tell us what to do." Vale looked at him, eyes soft, despite exhaustion. "You have courage, kid. Let's hope it's enough." Ross and Ryan moved to the terminal while Vale guided them through the commands. The screens flickered, lines of data racing by. Scout paced near the doorway, ears twitching. Then, from somewhere above, a sharp metallic clang echoed through the chamber. Footsteps, heavy, fast. Ryan froze. "They're back." Vale's fingers flew over the keys. "Just a few more seconds." Ross raised her weapon, eyes fixed on the stairwell. The hum spiked, turning into a roar that made the floor vibrate. Lights flared, bathing the chamber in harsh white. "Gaia Core, manual override initiated." The ground shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Vale yelled over the noise. "Run!" Ross grabbed Eli's arm. "Move!" They sprinted toward the ladder as Scout barked furiously, the noise of machines swallowing their voices. Behind them, Vale stayed at the terminal, shouting something lost in the thunder. When they burst out into daylight, the air itself seemed to tremble. The trees bent as if in pain, their roots glowing faintly beneath the soil. A low pulse ran through the earth, like the forest was breathing. Ross pulled Eli close, shouting over the noise. "He did it! He triggered the fail-safe!" Eli looked back toward the hatch. The glow below dimmed, then vanished. The hum faded, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Scout whimpered and pressed against Eli's leg. The forest was silent again, alive, but holding its breath. For the first time in weeks, Redwood Creek woke to silence that wasn't heavy. The hum had stopped. The air felt lighter, cleaner, though the earth still trembled faintly beneath the surface. Like something deep underground was breathing out after a long confinement. Mist drifted through the valley, tinted gold by the rising sun. The forest stood still, damp and gleaming, as if rinsed of all its secrets. Eli Turner stood at the edge of the clearing, where the strange concrete building had once loomed. What remained now was a fractured slab, cracked and overgrown, steam curling up from its seams. Scout sat beside him, fur glistening with dew, head tilted toward the trees. Every few seconds, the dog sniffed the air and then looked up at Eli, waiting for some unspoken reassurance. Behind them, Officer Marlene Ross finished speaking into her radio. Her uniform was streaked with mud, her auburn hair undone from the chaos of the night before. The fatigue etched into her face couldn't hide the steady calm in her eyes, the look of someone who had seen disaster and chosen not to break. "Evacuation's been lifted," she said, tucking the radio back into her jacket. "Power's stable again. The state's sending a research team to contain the site. Eli's eyes stayed on the ruins. He's still down there. Ross followed his gaze. Maybe. The blast collapsed half the tunnel. Search crews will start as soon as it's safe. He saved us, Eli whispered. If he didn't finish that code, Ross laid a hand on his shoulder. He knew the risk. Her voice softened. You should be proud of him. Vale did what no one else could. Helen Turner's voice cut through the clearing. And my grandson did what no one else should have had to. She stood a few yards away, wrapped in her heavy coat, her gray hair tied back. Her expression was stern, but her eyes betrayed relief. Eli turned toward her. You came. Of course I came, she said, her tone gruff but trembling. You think I'd sit at home while the forest tries to swallow my grandson alive? Ross smiled faintly. He did well, brave kid. Helen's glance softened briefly. He's got more curiosity than sense, just like his father. They stood there for a moment, 3 figures and a dog, framed against a forest, reborn. The wind carried the smell of wet pine and soil, and somewhere far off, a single bird began to sing again. As the rescue crews arrived, Ross coordinated with them, her voice calm, efficient. Eli watched her work and thought about everything that had happened. The hum, the light, the tunnels, Vale's final words. It all felt like a dream half-remembered, something too large for his mind to hold. One of the men from the state team approached, a tall figure in a bright orange safety jacket. He had a weathered face and a clipped, no-nonsense tone. Officer Ross, I'm Chief Inspector Dale Mercer. Ross turned. Appreciate you getting here so quickly. Mercer nodded. He looked around the clearing, whistling softly. Looks like a controlled detonation. You sure this was natural? Ross didn't answer right away. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. Mercer studied her for a moment. You've got the look of someone who already knows the story. Ross gave a faint smile. Let's just say I have seen enough to believe in strange things. Mercer nodded, pulling off his gloves. We'll sweep for survivors. If anyone's still down there, we'll find them. Eli's heart lifted slightly at that. You think there's a chance? Mercer crouched to Scout's level and scratched behind his ear. There's always a chance, he said, eyes kind but serious. Dogs like this one know it better than anyone. Scout wagged his tail once, pressing his head into the man's hand. As the crew began setting up equipment, Eli wandered toward the edge of the forest. The morning light filtered through the redwoods, dappling the ground. He noticed something then. Small green shoots sprouting through cracks in the concrete. Fresh growth, impossibly fast. The leaves shimmered faintly with a bluish tint, catching the light like glass. He crouched to touch one, and for a brief second, he felt a pulse beneath his fingers. Slow, steady, alive. "Grandma," he called. "Look!" Helen joined him, bending carefully, her brows furrowed. They weren't here before. Ross approached too, squinting at the strange plants. "Residual energy from the system, maybe," she said. "Or something Vale left behind." Eli smiled faintly. Maybe it's his way of saying it worked. Helen straightened, looking at the trees that now seemed to stretch taller, greener than the day before. If this forest is his legacy, he gave the world something worth keeping. Ross crossed her arms, watching the crews move equipment toward the ruins. The higher-ups will turn this into a classified site by tomorrow. We'll never hear the real story again. Eli looked toward the sunlight breaking through the canopy. Maybe that's okay. The forest remembers. Later, as trucks and uniforms filled the clearing, Ross led Helen and Eli back toward town. The air was warming now, the scent of pine thick and alive. Scout trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure they were following. On the trail, Ross broke the silence. Once they seal the site, the case will go federal. I'll probably lose access. Helen glanced at her. You sound almost disappointed. Ross smiled faintly. I am. Not many cases end with the forest breathing again. Eli hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a small metal tag, scorched at the edges. I found this near the hatch, he said. Ross took it, brushing away the soot. Etched into the metal were 2 words, for renewal. She handed it back. Keep it, Eli. You earned it. When they reached town, life had already begun to return to normal. The power lines hummed again. The diner reopened, and distant laughter from the schoolyard floated across the street. But something invisible had shifted, a quiet awareness that the ground beneath them was not just dirt, but memory, alive and watchful. That evening, the three of them sat on Helen's porch as the sun dipped below the trees. The sky burned orange, then faded to rose. Scout lay at Eli's feet, tail flicking lazily. Helen sipped her tea and spoke softly. Your father used to say the forest always gives back what you put in, for better or worse. Eli looked toward the horizon, where the treetops shimmered with new light. Then maybe Dr. Vale gave it something good. Ross leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. He gave it hope. The wind shifted, carrying a faint rustle from the woods. Not the mechanical hum that had haunted them for so long, but the gentle whisper of life returning. Eli smiled, resting his hand on Scout's head. Guess we're finally home, boy. Scout gave a soft woof, leaning into his touch. As dusk deepened, the forest exhaled one last sigh of wind, carrying the scent of new growth through the valley. Somewhere deep beneath the roots, a faint, steady pulse continued, not ominous this time, but gentle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that belonged not to machines, but to the earth itself. The Green Veil system slept, not dead, but dreaming, watched over by the forest, by the boy who had found it, and by the dawn that promised everything could grow again. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't thunder or fire from the sky. They're quiet, like roots growing in the dark, or a single heartbeat that refuses to stop. Maybe what happened in Redwood Creek wasn't just science. Maybe it was grace. A reminder that no matter how broken the world seems, life always finds a way back, because God never forgets what He's created. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever doubted that goodness still exists, look closer. You might find it breathing right beneath your feet. May God bless everyone watching this story today. May He keep your heart brave, your faith alive, and your spirit open to the quiet miracles around you. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in hope. Leave a comment and tell us what you would have done if you had found that hidden place. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next story, one filled with love, mystery, and the quiet hand of God working through ordinary lives.